Good evening and welcome. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Happy Friday. We've learned a lot in the past 5 days. Maybe the most important thing we've learned is that Joe Biden is not capable of running the country. Joe Biden is senile. Saying that out loud is not an attack on Biden. Any decent person feels sorry for him. You watch him gaze vacantly into the middle distance or stumble like a drunk man trying to cross an icy street as he careens through his prepared remarks. There's no joy in watching any of that. It could be any of us someday and probably will be. It's not Joe Biden's fault he can't think clearly. It's an indictment of the people around him. In the months before last November's election, Joe Biden's own family knew perfectly well that he was in profound cognitive decline. They were worried about it. They told other people they were worried about it, which is how we know. But they did nothing to stop Biden from running for president. Neither did Ron Klain, who's now the White House chief of staff. Klain is highly familiar with Joe Biden's senility. He works there every day. So does Mike Donilon and Gene Sperling and Susan Rice and the rest of the people making the decisions in this country, very much including Barack Obama. They all know. These are hard and cynical and clear-eyed people. They have worked with Joe Biden for many years. Not one of them has any doubt that Biden is failing. And now that's obvious to the rest of the country. Anyone who's been paying attention already caught on to this, of course. But until recently, it didn't seem to matter a whole lot. You saw Biden on television grinning and mumbling. He was up there reminding you to put on your little mask or wear your seatbelt or go easy on the sodium. None of it seemed especially threatening. These are the things that elderly men talk about in real life. Be safe out there, kids. But in the last week, we've been reminded how tiny our domestic concerns actually are. They're neuroses born of narcissism. A Chinese flu virus? Please. That's hardly the scariest thing going on in the world right now. It's not even close. The entire U.S. military has just been humiliated by illiterate peasants in turbans. And if that's not insulting enough, many of them were carrying our rifles as they did it. It makes you wonder about the future of the West and who's going to replace us when we're gone. Someone in authority probably ought to be thinking about that and about a lot of other things, too. What are we going to do when the Chinese finally move against Taiwan? How are we going to respond when there's a credible challenge to the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? There are issues out there, a lot of them, in other words, that matter slightly more than whether you keep your mask over your nose on that Southwest flight to Tucson. It is shameful. It's embarrassing when you think of how totally frivolous and up our own butts we've been for the last couple of years. All we can say for certain at this point is that Joe Biden will not be making any of the big decisions going forward. He's not capable of being the president in crisis. So who will be? We can't say. But it's clear if you watch closely that things are changing very fast in Washington. The people around Biden are moving away from him in ways that are not at all subtle. Why is this happening now? Was it always the plan? Did the party that hates white guys finally realize it was being led by one? Again, we don't know the answer. But the signs of it are everywhere, and they are strikingly obvious. Some of Biden's most senior appointees are contradicting him in public. If you cover politics, it is shocking to see that. It's a violation of the first and most ruthlessly enforced rule in any White House, which is don't diminish the boss. But suddenly they're doing just that, and they're doing it openly. Just hours after Biden assured the country that things were fine in Afghanistan, Lloyd Austin, as defense secretary, described the situation in Afghanistan as a disaster, and then Austin repeated this for emphasis. Others are doing the same thing. Here's Biden this afternoon telling us that American citizens are having no trouble whatsoever getting to the airport in Kabul. After Biden assured the country that things were fine in Afghanistan, Lloyd Austin, as defense secretary, described the situation in Afghanistan as a disaster, and then Austin repeated this for emphasis. Others are doing the same thing. After Biden assured the country that things were fine in Afghanistan, Lloyd Austin, as defense secretary, described the situation in Afghanistan as a disaster, and then Austin repeated this for emphasis. Others are doing the same thing. Here's Biden this afternoon telling us that American citizens are having no trouble whatsoever getting to the airport in Kabul.
We have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport. We've made an agreement with the Taliban thus far. They've allowed them to go through. It's in their interest for them to go through.
So there was the President of the United States going on television today to assure us that things are fine for Americans in Kabul. But just an hour later, here's the Pentagon spokesman telling you that actually that's not true. Americans are being beaten in Kabul. Watch.
Defense Secretary Austin just now in a briefing call with House lawmakers said the reports Americans have been beaten by the Taliban in Kabul. Is the U.S. military under orders to stay at the airport and not go protect them?
I think we've been talking about this throughout the entire briefing. We're certainly mindful of these reports, and they're deeply troubling. And we have communicated to the Taliban that that's absolutely unacceptable, that we want free passage through their checkpoints for documented Americans. And by and large, that's happening.
So the president tells us that we have an ironclad deal with the Taliban and everything's cool. An hour later, John Kirby tells us we're deeply concerned about what the Taliban is doing. So in a normal administration with the president who planned on serving out his full 4-year term, what you just saw would qualify as a kind of scandal. The Pentagon spokesman would be in serious trouble. He just contradicted his boss, the man who's supposed to be in control of the entire executive branch of government. But as we noted, things are changing very fast. Watch it happen again. Here's Biden from today telling us that al-Qaeda has been driven from Afghanistan.
What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone? We went to Afghanistan for the express purpose of getting rid of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, as well as getting Osama bin Laden. And we did.
Once again, just an hour after he said that, the President of the United States is contradicted in public by his own employee. Again, here's the Pentagon spokesman.
We know that al-Qaeda...
The President of the United States is contradicted in public by his own employee. Again, here's the Pentagon spokesman.
We know that al-Qaeda is a presence, as well as ISIS, in Afghanistan, and we've talked about that for quite some time.
But the president just said that there is no al-Qaeda presence in Afghanistan, and that does not seem to be correct.
What we don't think is that what we believe is that there isn't a presence that is significant enough to merit a threat to our homeland as there was back on 9/11 20 years ago.
So that's the opposite of what Biden just said. So here you have the top spokesman for the most powerful agency in the entire government informing us that the President of the United States has no idea what he's talking about. You don't see that every day. In fact, you never see it. But it's not just Biden's employees who appear to be turning on him in public. So are some of his key political allies, the neocons, liberals who used the Republican Party for their own purposes for decades before abandoning it when Trump arrived, are now attacking Joe Biden openly and very aggressively. That didn't take long. But most telling of all is this. It's from CNN. Watch.
It is just an absolute mess. And we heard President Biden say yesterday in his comments to ABC News that this is not a failure. And I think a lot of people outside that airport, particularly those taking the kinds of extreme actions we're just talking about, would like to know, if this isn't failure, what does failure look like exactly?
So Joe Biden failed, and he's lying about it. That's what CNN just told us. It is hard to overstate the significance of the clip you just saw. CNN is not a news network. CNN is a political organization. Its anchors and reporters don't decide for themselves what to say on camera. They are told what to say. They're told in highly specific terms every weekday morning on a call with their commander, Jeff Zucker. There's no intellectual freelancing at CNN. Here's what I think. No. It's a united front, a single hymnal for the entire congregation. When CNN takes a position or changes its position on something, it changes as one. Everybody, from the chirpy morning dingbats to Don Lemon on the night shift, they all say precisely what they are told to say. Ever watch the channel? And now they're saying something very, very different. Consider this person. This is a former member of the morning zoo crew on a contemporary hit station in Yakima, Washington. On a good day, she's probably operating with a functional IQ of about 85. So it's fair to say she is not coming up with her own material. And yet here she is, visibly outraged on the air, telling you what an incompetent, bad person Joe Biden is.
The rapid fall of Afghanistan stunning the Biden administration and this nation, quite frankly. And many of the promises, predictions, and the words of the president and his White House are coming back to haunt them.
what is going on here? These are literally the people who got Joe Biden elected president. He would not be president without these people. And now, just 7 months into his administration, they are telling you that he has failed personally. It does not make sense. And it's not the issue. Afghanistan is hardly the first disaster. As of tonight, our southern border has collapsed. The murder rate is spiking in our cities. The COVID vaccines do not work. Inflation is out of control. The country's entire population of school children hasn't been educated in more than a year. All of that's been going on. None of it seemed to bother CNN in the slightest. In fact, they reserve their energy to attack anyone who noticed those trends. But now, suddenly, their anchors are completely and totally enraged because Americans are trapped in Afghanistan. They don't notice the 70,000 who die every year of drug ODs. But this has sent them into paroxysms of self-righteous rage. Call us cynical, but we don't buy it. Something else is going on here. We don't know what it is exactly, but it's pretty obvious. Glenn Greenwald is an independent journalist. His work is on Substack. He joins us tonight. I should say to our audience, we have not talked about this. I have no idea what your views are on this. I was talking to my producers 2 hours ago. Let's just get Glenn Greenwald. He's smart. Maybe he'll know what the hell's going on. Because I don't, but something is. What do you think is happening?
Well, first of all, on the question of Biden's capabilities, I think it's worth recalling that throughout 2019, leading Democrats were the ones on that station, on MSNBC, in the press, who were constantly warning that Biden's cognitive decline was obvious because they were worried he would get the nomination and not be able to withstand the rigors of the election. And he was lucky that the pandemic happened and he was able to hide in his basement. So that has been a narrative that came from the Democratic Party, and obviously it's worsened over the last 2 years. But I actually think that one of the things that's going on here is obviously the corporate wing of the media, the liberal corporate wing, is liberal. They're attached to the Democratic Party, but with one exception, which is they really do believe constantly in militarism and war. Their closest relationships in the media are with the CIA, are with the Pentagon, are with the national security state. They constantly cheer for war. They constantly want more war. And I think that they don't care about things like crises at the border or inflation or joblessness, none of which affects them. I do think, though, that they're deeply offended when they see America greatness as they perceive it falling and failing. And these kinds of images are ones Americans are not accustomed to seeing, losing to what is essentially a primitive fighting force in the most humiliating manner possible. So I think that it offends their ideology, which believes in militarism, which constantly cheers for war. And I think they're being told by a lot of their sources in the military, in the CIA, who they revered the most and who did not want withdrawal. Remember, Tucker, when Trump tried to withdraw from Afghanistan, the CIA invented a lie that Russians had placed bounties on the heads of American soldiers and leaked it to the New York Times to prevent Trump from leaving. A lot of official Washington doesn't want this withdrawal, and they didn't want it with Trump. They didn't want it with Biden, and I think a lot of the anger is coming from that.
So I was fervently in favor of withdrawing. I'm grateful that we did withdraw. I'm just offended by the incompetence and the humiliation that accompanied it. What you're saying is that we imagined CNN was controlled by the DNC. In fact, it's controlled by the CIA.
Exactly. And I mean, they're certainly, the two are kind of the same usually, right? I mean, over the past 5 years, there's been a merger between the Democratic Party and the CIA. If you look at polling, Democratic voters revere the CIA, revere the FBI. It's Republicans who are skeptical of the deep state as a result of the Trump years. But I do think that's part of it. But I also think, and this is key, is that the Biden plan to withdraw from Afghanistan was founded and based in a lie from the beginning, which is he kept saying that the Afghan National Security Forces were strong enough to withstand the Taliban attack and would hold them off, and that it would be almost impossible for the Taliban to take over the whole country. Had he been truthful with the American people that once we withdrew, the Taliban would take over, I think the reaction would have been a lot different. I think they believed him and they feel betrayed as well by what they told him.
I completely agree with that. He said the other day in an interview with ABC, he says, it's ugly when you leave. And I think most, including me, I would buy that completely. It was the lying that was so infuriating. It's interesting, though. I mean, I've never, and you've covered politics at least as long as I have, I've never seen like a cabinet secretary or his spokesman contradict the president on something meaningful like this repeatedly. What is that?
You know, I mean, look, a lot of this is speculative, right? We don't have access to Biden's medical records. We're not able to examine him. We're not competent medical or psychological professionals. But if you look at Joe Biden, I don't believe anyone who says that they don't see clear signs of cognitive decline. I see the discomfort in the faces of Kamala Harris and Secretary Blinken when they're standing behind him. Everything that he says seems very fragile. It's almost like you can see the levers of his brain kind of slowing down and not really working well. And so half the time that he says stuff, it's left to the rest of the administration to go and clean it up. I find it uncomfortable to watch the President of the United States speak. And of course, his own aides feel the same way.
Yeah, I disagree with him, of course. But I feel sorry for him every time I see him. So I'm just being honest. I feel sorry for him every single time because it's awful to watch.
It's like
Greenwald, I appreciate
abuse.
you. That's how it feels to me. And his family knew. That's true. It's not speculation. That's true. And I don't know why this was allowed to happen. Glenn Greenwald, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tucker.
So the U.S. military spent billions training the Afghan army, and yet it collapsed just days after we left. The president seems surprised by this, but the people who actually trained those soldiers were not surprised at all. The details are pretty stunning. By the way, you can go to tuckercarlson.com.